You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Let's just update you on our top stories here this morning. And the US has launched a new strike against a Houthi target in Yemen. It's in retaliation for the Iran-backed group's attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Polls are open in Taiwan in presidential and parliamentary elections that will help shape its future relationship with China. And a tax expert has claimed that the Post Office could be facing a £100 million bill and insolvency after claiming tax relief for its compensation payments to sub-postmasters. Memos from Queen Elizabeth II's private secretary have revealed her death was very peaceful and that she slipped away in her sleep. Well, in a moment, we'll discuss the papers with the political correspondent at The Sun, Martina Bett, and political correspondent at The New Statesman, Freddie Hayward. First, though, let's take you through the front pages. And Houthis on the warpath, that's the lead story in The Times, which says that Houthi rebels in Yemen are threatening retaliatory attacks for the airstrikes by UK and US forces. The Express says that Rishi Sunak has been warned by the head of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee that Iran's Revolutionary Guard should be declared a terrorist organisation to protect the UK because Iran is backing the Houthis. The Telegraph carries calls from the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps for Tehran to call off what he describes as the Houthi thugs attacking shipping in the Red Sea. The Eye leads with former Prime Minister Lord Cameron's role in the airstrike, saying that just 2 months after returning to government as Foreign Secretary, he's at the helm of the decision-making and presented the attack plan to Cabinet. While the Mirror leads with what it calls the high price we're paying for the Red Sea conflict, increased risk of terror attacks here and soaring costs of shipping and the goods that they bring. The Daily Mail has seen documents which tell the story at the moment of the Queen's death in 2022, with a memo which says that she simply slipped away. And that story is also the lead for The Sun. The Financial Times says the Post Office could face a bill of £100 million if compensation payments already made to victims of the Horizon scandal are deemed unlawful. That's because it got tax relief on them. And finally, The Star has a story about what it calls alien babies, mummified eggs found in Mexico, which nobody knows the earthly origin of. Intriguing. Not the story that we're kicking off with, though. Here with me to go through the papers this morning are the political correspondent at The Sun, Martina Bett, and the political correspondent at The New Statesman, Freddie Hayward. So, very good morning to both of you. Lovely to see you both. And the strikes on Yemen are dominating a lot of the front pages once again. Last night, we've seen more strikes carried out just by the US on its own. That happened too late to make the papers, so they're still dealing with the first night of strikes. Freddie, you've picked out the Eye's coverage on this, and they've got an interesting headline. Cameron, they say, as in the Foreign Secretary, played a key role in the UK bombing. What do you make of that?
Well, it's not exactly surprising, is it? He's the Foreign Secretary. He's been in post for 2 months now. We know that Rishi Sunak was also quite preoccupied with going to Ukraine and announcing that several £1 billion of support for them and their war effort against Russia. So it's natural that David Cameron took a greater role in Cabinet alongside Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, and Oliver Dowden, who was coordinating the Whitehall response. He's the Deputy Prime Minister as well. So I don't think it's that surprising. We know that some people in government see Cameron's role as Prime Minister in the past as an asset when it comes to foreign policy. I think from Number 10, some of them think that if Cameron focuses on the foreign policy side of things, then Rishi Sunak can focus on the domestic. And I think we're seeing part of that play out here.
Do you think the implication of this headline is, Martina, that David Cameron is calling the shots, if you like? He's having more of an influence than the Prime Minister?
Yes, I see it a bit like that, because obviously we know that Rishi Sunak brought him back and it was after he pledged change, and of course he brought back a Prime Minister from 2010. Obviously, you know, Foreign Secretary gets involved in foreign affairs is not that big of a story. The story would have been Eddie not being involved. I think there was an interesting line in The Times, actually, that said that Sunak actually wasn't communicating directly with the US President Joe Biden. And I think it would be interesting to see if Cameron actually was talking to Biden in the last few days.
Oh, whether it was officials lower down that were communicating with each other.
Definitely.
I mean, it's hard to understate how much influence David Cameron has had on foreign policy. We've already seen a marked shift on the government's position on Israel and Gaza.
More criticism.
More criticism. We saw that in David Cameron's appearance in front of the Foreign Select Committee this week. He was much more strident in criticising Israel for killing more civilians than he thought was necessary. So, yeah, he has had an impact.
And I think it was suggested in the eye that Rishi Sunak wanted the experience because we know that in 2011 he led the strikes against Libya. Similarly, there was a vote in Parliament, but that was actually 2 days after the military action had started, which is what we're seeing today with the Prime Minister giving a statement to the House of Commons on Monday.
Afterwards, but probably not a vote.
Sorry, not a vote.
But Labour backs it, so there's no controversy over which way a vote would go.
Of course, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP said there should be a retrospective vote, but that's not the Prime Minister's intention. He said he wants to do a statement, which will be followed by questions. So it'll probably be quite a long time for him to stand on his feet in the House of Commons on Monday.
Yeah, a good few days after the strikes happened. Take us to the Times, though, Martina, because they have... in their headline, Houthis on the warpath, they're putting their focus on the impact in the region, and an extraordinary picture there of Houthi fighters, they say, in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, where a huge number of people came out.
Yes, of course. So we know last night that US actually conducted further strikes against Yemen, and the Times reports that Britain is now prepared to launch further strikes. And that was what ministers were actually saying yesterday. They did not rule out further strikes from the UK to Yemeni targets, and Lord Cameron said that he was going to do what is necessary. And we know that the Houthi rebels have actually said they are prepared to strike back. So it will be interesting to see what we do in that case. HMS Diamond, the British Royal Navy ship, is in the Red Sea at the moment and is there to take any action that the government deems necessary.
Well, yes, sorry, Freddie, I was only going to say that the government has said they have no plans for further strikes, but inevitably, if the attacks on British ships in the Red Sea continue, they want to keep their options open.
Well, this is the broader point, isn't it? What was the purpose of the strikes? The purpose was to essentially stop the Houthi rebels from sending those drones and missiles into the Red Sea. And we've seen the leaders there essentially say they're going to continue and they're going to try and step up their attacks on ships in the Red Sea. So the question becomes, how do you achieve the stated aims of the strikes?
Unless they've managed to reduce their capability to such an extent they're unable to carry out those strikes. That would be the hope of...
It is the hope, but there will be some doubt over that, and because the Saudi government has been trying to disarm and reduce the capability of the rebels for 8 years now, and they've not been exactly reluctant to use airstrikes to do so. So there is a question over what happens now, and then the broader issue as well is about whether this will destabilise the region in any more. We've seen, for instance, Turkey has called the strikes disproportionate. I mean, I think the US and the UK will be grateful that there has been quite a broad coalition when it comes to this, because it's so important to be seen to have international legitimacy. But the reaction from the Houthi rebels over the next few days will be key.
Well, absolutely. And in the meantime, the Mirror says there's a price that's being paid for it. They are talking about, on two fronts, they're talking about the terror attack risk rising, they think, as a result of this, but also they're highlighting the fact that we may be paying more in the shops because the ships are currently having to divert away from the Red Sea because of the risk of attack.
Exactly. So, the Red Sea is a really crucial shipping lane. We know that 30% of global trade goes through there. And we've heard from several businesses in the UK already saying that because of what's happening with the Houthi rebels, their stocks are being affected, that they've got to basically go around Africa, and that's causing delays. And now we've got to see these businesses, are they going to pass on those costs to customers, to consumers? And also the other question, I think, that we saw last night, oil prices as a result of the strikes are surging, and that could have an impact on energy prices, and that could have an impact on inflation here in the UK, which is a big question for the Prime Minister.
And this is affecting a lot of countries around the world. the impact on inflation and the economy, because so many ships are having to take this detour, and there will be a lot of countries that are concerned about this.
Completely. We know from some of the reporting that the UK potentially tried to hold off from the strikes over the past few days because they were so concerned about the impact on the economy and on inflation. It's one of the key shipping lanes in the world. So, of course, you have to balance the protection of the ships as they come through, and that's the purpose of the strikes, with the risk of that greater destabilisation. And that's what the government's trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. So, but really interesting to see where it goes from here. And as you say, those concerns about escalation already hanging in the air. Let's move on, though, to the Financial Times front page story. And this is something we've already talked about on the programme because it's a really interesting story. Who's talking about this, first of all? Martina, you picked it out. This is about the Post Office and tax. So explain it to us.
Yes, so the Post Office apparently risk insolvency, and that's because a think tank has done some analysis on its tax filings, on its tax accounts.
And the name Dan Needle, some people might recognise.
Yes, because he's done a lot of work with Nadeem Zahawi Tax Affairs.
That's right.
But yeah, basically, so they claimed tax relief on the compensation that was paid to the victims of the Post Office scandal. Normally, corporation tax, you can offset certain costs, but fines are not part of that. Tax experts believe that they're not part of that, and the Post Office, actually the HMRC has got a claim against the Post Office that could be up to 100 million, and if they are made to repay that figure, they could become insolvent, which is a huge thing because that could mean that the government needs to intervene, but it could also mean job losses. So not a good story for the Post Office, for sure.
No, absolutely. And we haven't had a response from the Post Office yet. So interesting to see what they have to say about that. And you'd imagine they'd have their own lawyers and tax experts internally that would have looked at this. But it could have big implications, potentially.
Oh, completely. I mean, the Post Office is a national institution. It's been going through such a tough few years. And this just speaks to the fact that this scandal in general has completely undermined the Post Office's reputation. It's pointed to the fact that they've got many problems with their accounts. But I do think it's good that finally the attention is back on the Post Office. We've seen a week of this quite unedifying spectacle in Parliament where each of the political parties are trying to blame one another for the scandal just because we've seen such public outcry following that ITV drama. So I think it's right that the story shifted back to the Post Office.
And I think there's this sense of British fairness. People are going to look at this and I say, you know, the Post Office did something wrong. They had to try to solve that by providing compensation, and they try to get behind it and not pay tax. So it's not going to go down well with the British public, for sure.
OK, and I have got an update on that story, but I'm going to say thank you to both of you because we're done for now, but we've got a couple more goes at the papers in the next couple of hours. But for the moment, Martina and Freddie, thanks very much indeed.